Hold on. Stand by.
My name is and your life is going to change. You are going to be dead. My name is and your life is going to change. You are going to be dead. My name is and your life is going to change. You are going to be different. You are going to be out. You are going to be bigger and larger than ever imagined the possible. And you know why? Because just you and I will find the power that's been dormant inside of you all of this time. And all of this time you were afraid to go out and no longer look at me. You will be you will be the guy or guys. You will be the one that everybody hears you and says, hey, look, they're there. The doctor there. The teacher there. There's the one that will make my life different. And would like to do that? Remember, I'm here to tell you. I'm here to change your life. Your life will no longer be the same. Together, I'm going to conquer the world. The more you know, everything you imagine possible will become possible for one simple reason. And it is possible. My name is and your life is going to change. You are going to be dead. My name is and your life is going to change.
And welcome everyone to a new program in Uncommon Sense. We're taking a little bit of a twist today. The season 1 in Possibility Thinking has ended, and this is season 2. We're starting with episode 1, and I thought that this would be a brilliant way for leading us into the new world, exploratory world, a world in which we have now conquered all the things that needed to be conquered, not just underwater, but space and everywhere else, and including your inner mind. So I have today a very special guest who is one of the powerhouses responsible for the International Space Station and why it's up in space. Christine Kretz, thank you and welcome to this program. Tere Riley is in the background and she will join us if and when she is needed. But Christine, welcome to Uncommon Sense.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me, Dr. Gill. It's great to see you.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. And you are the one who's starting off a series of programs on possibility thinking and what it takes to take humanity, to push humanity forward. And you are one of the key people I wanted to talk to about taking this forward and helping us. I wanted to understand what your role was in doing what you're doing and why it's such a marvelous, because every time I talk to you, I mean, this is the third time I think I talked to you, you're always glowing when you talked about your work.
Well, it's exciting to work with the International Space Station, and I'm lucky to have this job. I'm relatively new to the team. The International Space Station has been up in space and hosting astronauts for just about 20 years now. So that's amazing. But I have been with the International Space Station U.S. National Lab for about a year and a half, and our role in the National Lab, which is approaching its 10-year mark, is to make space accessible to people who would like to do research, so that when you think about doing research in space, it feels like you don't have a chance to do that. How could people be able to reach that? How do you get your science in space? And our job as an organization is to make that attainable, help with that process, and help people grow their research so that we find some interesting new results from that. So it's really an exciting job. I can't say enough about the great folks that I get to work with at the National Lab and at NASA to make that possible.
Tell us a little bit more about the recent collaboration with SpaceX and getting out there into the space station.
Well, that is exciting because it's a public-private partnership, and that means there's all sorts of possibilities when it's not just government funded, which is what NASA does, but in fact, you have a private organization, in this case SpaceX, and there are others. SpaceX decided to build rockets and be able to go to space with a goal to going to Mars, and that's no small challenge, and they said they were going to do it. So what happened was that over time, they've effectively built a rocket. They have gotten the ability to send crew to the space station. And for the first time in almost a decade, recently, we launched astronauts from U.S. soil up to the space station. For the last decade, we've used Russian rockets to do that. So
Wow.
it's an amazing change. It's great because there hasn't been anything since the space shuttle that has been able to take that on. And now it's a private organization, SpaceX, who's providing that capacity. And I'll add this. If you were watching, you'll notice that Bob and Doug, the astronauts, had 2 seats, and there were 2 other seats on that crew capsule.
Wow.
I like to think they saved me a seat, but my point is only they did save somebody a seat. So there's
Right.
more room on those rockets, and that space is for people who may be private citizens, private researchers.
Wow. And I wonder, are they made
New
big
day.
enough for somebody like me, for instance? Or you have to be a certain weight?
The lovely bucket seat there, I'm sure you could fit in it. It looks very comfy to me.
Now, there must be a certain kind of thinking involved for people to be involved in this project. I mean, you have a lot of people that say things are impossible, it cannot be done, da, 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 da. So tell me a little bit more about the crew you work with. What kind of thinking goes into making a project like this happen?
Well, in general, I think you have to understand kind of the way space works, microgravity, radiation. You have to know the factors, but once you know the science and you start exploring, you just solve those problems.
Mhm.
And if you look at the companies that are in private business, like SpaceX, like Blue Origin, they have people who are visionary, who are leading those groups, and who have made a decision that they're going to go and build a rocket, fly a rocket, put crew into space. That's their mission, that's their goal, and that's their drive. Now they've supplied some funding, they've gotten other funding, that's always a factor, but you also have to have teams of people who know the science and the engineering and have the drive. And those teams are the groups that have gotten rockets from SpaceX into space, and Blue Origin again building theirs, and Sierra Nevada, other companies.
Mhm.
You have
Mhm.
teams of people who are really driven to be problem solvers.
Wow. Just before we continue with the next question, you got people saying hello to you from Canada, from Singapore, from Belgium, from Thailand,
Wow.
and from the Philippines, just to let you know so far.
I'm very excited, and I'm greetings to you. I'm in New York today, so hi everybody from New York.
Yes, you're actually about 5 minutes from my home. Actually, my kids
Oh,
yeah, my
we're
kids are there.
neighbors.
Yeah, we are. I wish I had a chance to meet you then. Tell me something. We're talking about possibility thinking and the kind of folks that are willing to spend their entire life given to a project to take something from imagination to reality. And tell me a little bit more about you as a person and your involvement with the project and the kind of emotional attachment, mental attachment to the project at hand. What drives Christine to take the helm like that?
I think a lot of people who work in space are a little bit like me. I'm kind of type A and kind of like a challenge and a risk. So, when I was younger, I wanted to be an astronaut, and
Hmm.
I think the space program was Space Shuttle at the time, and that was a kind of a dream of mine, and I didn't pursue it, and then I worked in research and other things, and an opportunity came up to work with space, and I had to go for it. And I picked up and moved to Florida so I could take the job. And I think that you have a lot of people like me who are maybe grew up with the idea of space, or maybe were other kind of risk takers who felt like they would take on a challenge like this and are excited by that challenge, and not daunted, because you do get problems, little bumps in the road, little speed bumps, little setbacks. You have to keep driving forward, and I think there are certainly examples in space of where those kinds of problems have been overcome, so they ultimately get to launch a rocket into space.
Tell me something about the kind of thinking that these folks have. The issue I face as a psychologist every day is when people face an obstacle or a problem or a block or a failure, most people stop. At least 70% of people stop. They don't go forward. They change course. They do something else instead of pursuing that. And what kind of psychology is involved to be on the winning team that made it finally in the end? What kind of thinking to serve? Yeah.
It probably goes back to the idea that when you fail at something, you just learned another way not to do that versus right. And it's sort of like making the light bulb. Well, we found 255 ways not to make a light bulb. Eventually, you find the last way, and that's the way you do make a light bulb. And so space has a history of a whole lot more failures before you achieve results. There are terrific videos to show epic fail. But that's the way you learn the thing that doesn't work, and you improve on that model, and you improve and you improve. When people work with us and they do research in space, and it's probably taken them to pack up and get their research project ready, maybe 2 years till it flies on a rocket. And when it gets up there, there's times when it doesn't work. The setup wasn't right, something broke, and it's super disappointing. But what you learn is what didn't work, and what you learn is how to get that right. And some of the most successful research teams that we work with are on 3rd, 4th, 5th flights. Each time they learn something, each time they correct, and each time they go back and change the design. And so space, I guess, is a place for very, very patient people who manage to get up every day, and even in spite of having failed at something, learned something from that, and then took that and moved on to improve their recipe.
So if I can reiterate what you're saying, failure is an opportunity to improve.
You learn something with every time that you did something that didn't work. You figured out what didn't work so you could do differently next time.
Differently the next time. I grew up, I just want to let you know, in my early 20s, using the Apollo mission tagline as my motto in life. It says, failure is not an option.
An option.
Yeah, exactly.
But in fact, failure is part of a process. So again, the way that they got that SpaceX rocket to be able to go up, and we haven't talked about the fact that it comes back down and it lands on the pad. It's reusable, which is amazing. So they had a lot of times when it didn't hit the right spot or fell over in the water or whatever. And each time they course corrected and learned how to do it better. Each time it's a failure, it's just it's a learning opportunity, and you have to try to get back up and fix that thing and move on.
So that moment that the astronauts made it into space, how did that feel like for you personally?
I think I was among thousands of people all over the world watching the really great footage. And because of the pandemic, they didn't want anybody to be up really near the launch itself. So everybody was watching it on laptops and television. And the footage was amazing. And it's, I think your heart beats faster, and you can't not smile at that big rocket going up there.
What's next now for you?
Wow, we have a lot of research left to do before the space station gets decommissioned, and we're also working with companies that will probably be the next private space station about the kind of research that will go up there. So the research that we are working on, I'm very, very passionate about. It's research that benefits life on Earth. So the astronauts, while they're up there, are very, very busy. They're doing a lot of research for us to come back and give back to researchers who find a lot of information. Examples are drug companies who are improving their formulation to potentially improve drugs for us on Earth. And even companies who are making things like tissue printing. So imagine a 3D printer that actually prints human tissue with the idea of growing that into an organ for replacement. That's really far-reaching, but imagine if somebody who needed a transplant could have an organ created for them in microgravity and brought back down for them to replace missing parts. So that's the kind of thing that's being worked on up there that could potentially be a real game changer for people's lives on Earth.
To change their lives. It reminds me of that Matt Damon movie, isn't it? Epsilon or something like that, where they had these machines in space that could transform, cure diseases and what have you, but it never made it to Earth or something.
I thought that was all the rich folks lived off the planet,
The rich
and everybody
folks,
who
yes,
was
that's
the
it.
poor folks lived on the planet. We don't want to see that. That looked like a bad deal. That looked like a
That
bad
was a
deal.
bad deal. But we're serving humanity. That's what we do.
I think a better one for this is the Martian, where he gets stuck on Mars, and then he says he has to put science behind it to save his life, and every day he has to get up and problem solve in order to be rescued from the planet. He's got a better attitude.
Or to science the heck out of it.
Like that's it. Yes. That's what he said. Science the heck out of it.
So now we're in orbit. We're in the International Space Station. The next step is which planet, which moon?
Oh, got to go back to the moon. So and the difference is not to just land on the moon, but live on the moon and make an outpost there, with the possibilities of finding new resources and so forth on the moon. So that is loosely stated is 2024. It'll be a challenge.
Right. Wow.
And the plan, as you probably have heard, is to have the next man and the first woman on the moon.
Wow, fantastic. And after that, we're headed to the big red planet.
Big red planet after that. So, and again, that's a long trip. So it wouldn't be a short day. It would be a lengthier day. And if you sign up for that one, that's going to be at least a three-year flight. So you're going to have to go out, stay a bit, and then fly back. So you're in it for at least 3 years if you're going.
Wow, then back is only 3 years, really?
It's about timing. So you have to get there, and then you'll be there for a little bit, and then you have to plan the flight back around when the orbit's correctly aligned. But you're signing up for 3 years minimum.
Wow. Okay, that's longer than most of my relationships have lasted, so that's good. It'll be a cinch. I can do that.
Well, you probably have to have good relationships with your fellow astronauts while you're flying out there, because I'm sure it's going to be close quarters.
Wow, fantastic. I wanted to know basically what people need to be able to become part of this work that you're doing, part of the crew, part of everything. Is there a possibility that what do they need to study? What they need to feel like, look like? What kind of mental aptitude is needed for this kind of work?
For being an astronaut, or just for working in aerospace?
Working in aerospace, being off planet, so to speak, as well.
So let's start with just jobs in aerospace. Here's the good news: they need every kind of background. So I'm an MBA, and my job is to do business to get things into space. But they need engineers, from civil engineers to electric engineers to psychologists and nurses and doctors. They need PhDs. They need everything. Whatever your job role is, from accountant to zoologist, whatever you're doing, there's somebody who's doing that in aerospace. And so if that's your passion and that's your job, you can bring that into a mission for one of these companies. So if you look, a lot of them have positions posted all the time. There's companies in aerospace hiring. If you want to be an astronaut, they recently posted job openings, and I think that the applications have closed, but the point is, as recently as last month, they still had job openings for astronauts. And what those are people with advanced degrees. So you do have to have an advanced degree for that. They tend to lean toward PhDs, but masters in engineering, for example, with science background. And they're really changing the kind of profile that you might have for an astronaut. So astronauts in the past would have been the thing you see in movies, test pilots, fighter pilots, people who were risk takers and often military and that was the beginning of the space program. But now you're looking at more science-based, and often people who can manage the close quarters, working closely with a team for a long time in a limited space. So that's a different kind of profile, and somebody who can manage the distance from Earth.
So now with the commercialization of space, which is what we've done, a historic move into space with the commercial flight, people may not need to have astronaut training. They could be just shipping managers. They could be
scientists. They could be tourists. So the space tourism will be coming at us soon. So you could be a researcher and sign on to do your own research on the station. You would your company, or you would pay. There would be some training. Obviously, you need to have some training about how you manage up there and how you work in space. It's different. Right. But there are companies that are preparing to open up seats on flights for people who are just citizens who would like to see space, and that's space tourism. And the last I heard, a seat was $250,000, but that changes. So it's going to be attainable soon. Now that we have crew going up in private space capsules, you can imagine somebody just making that a life goal and saying, that's what I want to do.
Just to leave the Earth. We are in conversation with Christine Kretz. She's from the International Space Station. We have Tere Riley in the background. Tere will be in the background for a little while, and then we'll continue our conversation with Christine. If you have any questions for her, now is a good time for you to ask the questions. You can ask it here on StreamYard, or you could ask it on Facebook Live, which I can see, but I don't think Christine can take a look at that right now because you're talking to me here. So now is a good time to ask your questions, guys, and I'll be able to convey your question to Christine as well. Joyce.
I think Joyce has a question about $250K to disappear for 3 years. Say, hi, Joyce. It's probably $250,000 for a ride up and around and back down. So that doesn't get you to Mars. I don't know that anybody's put a price tag on the trip to Mars yet.
Yeah, that's almost as expensive as a divorce, just to let you know. It's just around for but way more fun.
Way more fun.
If you have any questions, Christine and I are on standby. Christine has been so kind to do this interview with us and give us an idea into the kind of thinking necessary to head into the jobs of tomorrow, the ventures that are being opened for tomorrow. Basically, she's looking years ahead, where the rest of us think about what's happening tomorrow, the day after, our job next week, and take a look at someone whose mind is projecting into the future. What's next? And then it's a whole special group of people, I would imagine, that work there. So if you have any questions for me right now, and for Christine, please list them out here in StreamYard or on Facebook Live, and I'll convey that question. I have a question. When do you see it? I mean, I know it's hard for you to project, but when do you see us colonizing the moon or Mars?
Well, I'm guessing, I'm surmising, and I'm not NASA. But if they get the first boots back on the moon in 2024 and start building, it'll probably be another 5 to 10 years after that. And if you can imagine it being more of a working group, there are minerals and there are resources on the moon that countries are interested in harvesting. There are also organizations who are looking to land on asteroids, mine asteroids, and bring the resources back. And you're probably looking at 8 to 10 years. It's not that far in the future.
Wow. Wait, an asteroid is a moving object. That's not like a moon or something.
That's
That's going
a
to
little
be
difficult,
difficult.
but there are countries who have already started working on getting something that's a lander that can land on a moving asteroid, gather up the resources, and then return to Earth with heavy metals and other things that come from those asteroids. So they're working on that in places. They're working on things that land on Mars and the moon to do some work. So there will be, if you're into robotics, there will be a lot of robotics work so that you can put things out there and not endanger humans to go do that kind of work.
Wow. Um, uh, Gift Srichat from Thailand says, "Hi, Christine. My son, he'd like to be an astronaut. What field or subject that he needs most to take? Can we be well prepared? Thanks a lot."
It looks to me like they're currently hiring science and engineering specialists. That's a wide range. So PhDs in various sciences, biology, physics, engineers are needed too. So masters in engineering is an acceptable degree. And I would say as long as your son enjoys the subject and is passionate about that, that's the right direction. Any of the sciences or engineering that really keep his interest and make him excited to get up and do that every day. Because even if you don't make it to astronaut and you get into aerospace in a different way, you're excited about the work and interested in the work you're doing.
Great. I imagine many countries are now going to be encouraged by what you have done. The sending commercial flights into space and opening the way for the rest of the world. Would there be an international confederation or federation like Star Trek that controls who goes out and what goes out and all of that?
I think countries are currently coming together to decide what the rules are.
Okay.
And I think it's like maritime law, and countries have to decide the rules. And I think there's a lot of interest in keeping things orderly, fair, but most of all, I think there's a lot of people who desire to not pollute more planets. And so when you're out in space and you can look down at the beautiful Earth, which is, from what all astronauts tell me, the most beautiful sight, you appreciate that this is our home and we need to keep it clean. And during the pandemic, they could see air clean and things looking cleaner on the planet, even from space. Right. And there's a lot of people who want to make sure that when we move to Mars and we move to the moon, we don't pollute it as we go. So it's interesting to hear a lot of people advocating for how we're going to use resources wisely.
It's so funny and ironic that for the last 20 years, we've been talking about cleaning the environment and the planet, and a virus did it in 6 months, what we couldn't do in 20 years. That's very funny.
It's exciting to see that the Earth helps itself clean when we take a break from polluting it. So to have rivers run clean and skies over cities look clean, it means that we can do it. So there's a lot of people who are excited about the progress that got made just by locking people down for 3 months and showing that we can get a cleaner planet. We just have to work on that. And all of the astronauts are big advocates of keeping our Earth safe and clean, because so far this is the only place we know of where we can naturally live like we do.
Yeah. Because of what's happening in the States and everywhere, I said to people that the racial unifying factor is outer space. When we're all focused on the fact that we are a human race going into space, that there is no color in space, because
there's no color and there's no little map lines. When you look at a map and there's lines on it, the astronauts don't get to see those. All they see is a big, beautiful Earth and lots of blue water. So the astronauts always remind us that while they work together as an international team, when you look at the Earth, you don't get to see the outlines of countries.
That's amazing, isn't it? Will we ever come to a point where we're almost like Star Trek, where there is one country, one objective going to space, one prime directive not to interfere with alien cultures, all of that?
I don't know if we're ever going to all get our act together to do that, but I hope. I mean, I think that it
This
was.
is a hope.
I think that Star Trek was, and all of us in aerospace are Star Trek nerds. They really set an example of, multicultural team working together. So, and good for them. That's what we need.
I'm very close friends with one of the SpaceX engineers who's in charge of the propulsion systems for Mars, and I will have him on the show at one of these days as well. I gave him a hypothetical question, and I'll ask you the same hypothetical question as well. There is a young boy named Mel Gill who has always desired to go into space, but he can't compete with the big boys. So that's my computer telling me what time it is. Just make it funny so that I'll stay awake. And so he reverse engineers Nikola Tesla's designs and finds a way for the price of a Toyota car to fly into space. Can he do that without permission, or will he be shot down? Or
well, right now you can do that without permission. And they probably won't shoot you down going up. It depends on where you land. They might shoot you down on the way down. So careful where you land. That's right. They might not welcome you back, but you can go up. You just have to be careful where you come.
Just can't come back down. So you got to keep going. So it's Mars.
Just, plan it ahead of time so you'll be welcome back to where you're landing. So.
Well, just to let you know, I never talked to you about this before, but I have a desire in this life before I die to actually make it to Mars and back. Not just to make it to Mars, and hopefully not crash land there, but yeah.
Just plan well, because it's going to take you a couple of years there and back.
Yeah. I heard. This whole program is about being happy by creating schedules and throwing yourself into the future and not paying attention too much to the past. Learn what you can and then go forward after you make your mistakes, after you made your bad decisions, and so on and so forth. Personally, Christine, just you personally, what advice would you give someone who wants to be in your position eventually in life, doing what you're doing, all this fun stuff?
I would say, especially if you want to do aerospace fun stuff, if you're early in your career, look for internships in aerospace and get your foot in the door faster than I did. And the other end of it is I was late in my career when I finally got over here. And
when did you do that? At what age?
It wasn't 2 years ago, and I'm not telling you my age. I'm getting old, but just a couple of years ago. No, on the roof. And I was working at IBM, and the team from the International Space Station came to IBM Research, and I sat in the audience and I said, "That's what I want to do. I want to do that." And I got my resume out and I cleaned it up and I sent it over. Nobody asked me for it. I just sent them my resume and said, "I'd really be interested in working with you." And I followed up, and they did not have. I'll tell you, they did not have a job for me. No jobs available. But they liked my resume, and we stayed in touch. And every 4 to 6 months, the HR person and I would talk, and she would say, "I still don't have a job. I don't have a job for you, and I can't afford you." And that was we had that conversation a couple of times. And then one day she called and said, "I still can't afford you, but I have a job."
Wow, that's fantastic.
And I went and interviewed. So my thought there is, if there's something that you want to do and they don't know you're interested, they can't hire you. And so network into organizations where you want to work, have your resume ready, and be persistent. And if it not maybe just that one single job, but jobs in the field that are interesting to you, and you'll make it.
Fantastic. Well, that's going to be good advice for a lot of people. You worked at IBM. Is that the facility that's in Sleepy Hollow area? That whole
the one that's right over here in Yorktown. That's
in Yorktown. Yes.
Yorktown.
Okay.
It's the main research. It's the research lab for IBM.
Do you know, about 20 years ago, I was teaching. I was training people and leaders in IBM about leadership skills. It's a 6-day program. I wish I had met you there.
I was just starting when you were finished with that, so I just missed you. But
Yeah. Just
That that
miss how
that big beautiful building is built and opened in 1961. So it's a point in time, and it's still they still do all the kind of forward thinking research that they do there. So
amazing,
it
amazing.
was
Uh,
a fun 20 years.
you have a question from Ashok Thakur, who is in New York. He's the CEO of a cybersecurity firm. And he asks us, can you tell us about new technologies that will cut down the time drastically for our trips in outer space?
There's nothing yet. So we don't have warp speed and cool things like hyperdrive from Star Wars. But when you have your aerospace engineer on, he might tell you about some engines. The biggest thing is they're very big and powerful engines just to get off planet and to as far away as you have to go. But it's not anything that saves time. We're not there yet.
And Ashok is one of those folks who goes into the, I can't call it conspiracy, I don't know what to call it, where he talks about we have technologies that are 50 years in advance and DARPA and all of those kind of things. And so he loves to talk about stuff like that. And
I think they're not sharing that with me, Ashok. So I'll
yeah,
have to give them a call and tell them they have to give me more of the inside scoop. But it's interesting when you think about TVs and movies that you've seen when I was a kid, at least, right? So the Star Trek thing with the flip communicator, and then we had a flip phone. I mean,
yeah,
things that you could have where you could talk into your watch, and those were all fantasy in the 60s and 70s, right? And
right.
now you have your Apple Watch and you talk into it, and you have your cell phone, and you have all the things that you need on your communicator in your back pocket, and those didn't exist, but somebody thought them up, and then somebody made them. And so someday I guess we'll get to light speed and warp speed and hyperspace, because
Sure.
it's already been thought about. So I guess we'll have to get there and invent it.
I mean, we already have Siri, on our Apple phones talking to us
That's
anyway.
right. Just like, computer, tell me what we're doing. It's Siri, tell me how to get to the grocery store. So
And
amazing.
the funniest thing was when I put my iPhone in front of Alexa and I let them talk back and forth, Siri and Alexa. It was very interesting. Endless discussion.
Good conversation.
Who knows what will happen down there? There are a couple of things that people would need to have to maintain a peak aptitude, a peak performance thinking, and also emotionally to keep up. How does Christine do this? How does she? What's your day like?
Geez. Well, it starts with coffee. So
Okay.
need a little caffeine in the morning.
Yes.
I think I start by, checking out email and making sure I feel like I get ahead of the day and I'm not catching up from first thing in the morning. I think it's good to take a break at lunchtime and refresh. So I recommend that, clearing your head and not just plowing through that 8 or 10 hour day. And I really strongly think that a little bit of physical exercise, even a little bit, is really important. And bringing it back to astronauts, astronauts atrophy in space because of the lack of gravity. So they're required to do 2 to 3 hours of physical activity workout every day on the station to maintain their physical prowess, their physical health. And that also lends to their having time to themselves, listening to music while they're working out, and being able to get some of their mental health in good order. So I think those things go together, physical and mental, being able to get some exercise and if possible, some fresh air. Bad news, those astronauts don't get a lot of fresh air. They have not fresh.
Okay.
That air is the same air that's been up there for 20 years. It just circulates through an air filter.
So would you say that the International Space Station is sort of like a biosphere teaching us lessons about Earth? Or
It is, because everything that they have up there, they need to reuse water, air gets recycled. They have to be careful about what they're throwing out they can put things out to burn up in space. They can send it back to Earth as trash. But I do think that they have to learn to make tools that are needed. So they have a 3D printer in case they need a tool. And then they're working on ways to go to recycle the plastic from the tool into a new tool. Those are the kinds of technologies that we'll be able to use on Earth as well. If you could use something and then remake it into another thing and not just throw it out, that's going to be great for the Earth.
So they have 3D printers in space.
They have multiple 3D printers with different kinds of materials, from plastics to metals, and they can make tools and then they can reuse them. So you take the material, the plastic, and reuse it again. So you can make another tool.
How long has the space station been up there?
It'll be 20 years in October that the space station has had humans on it working on board nonstop for 20 years.
20 years.
20 years. So some of them for longer than a year. So the most famous was Scott Kelly, an astronaut who has a twin, and he was in space for a year, and they were monitoring his health and his wellness and his fitness at the same time as they were monitoring his twin here on Earth. And being able to compare how the space atmosphere, the microgravity affected Scott, and at the same time compare that to his twin here.
I would imagine when he came back 1 year and came back to Earth, could he even walk?
It's a little tough. Your muscles aren't used to that, but you have been working out 2 or 3 hours a day. And what I've heard it described as by one of the astronauts, it's like having a gorilla on your shoulders, and you just feel completely weighted down for days. And wow. It's hard. It's hard to come back to the gravity of Earth.
Wow. Okay. It almost sounds like marriage, actually, but so I'm just kidding.
But they do say what they really like is when they first get out of the capsule and they get to smell the beautiful smell of the Earth again, that you miss the scent of Earth. And they tell me that it's really great to come back and smell Earth, smell planet, smell the fresh air.
Unless they're in the middle of Bombay, that's a whole different thing altogether. It's not a good smell. But and I'm going to hear flack later.
Yeah, I won't say anything about. I won't pick on any particular country. I'll let you do that.
Yeah, sure. Leave me in trouble. Here's the question I have to ask: being an astronaut working in space, being a person working on the space program, it takes many hours, a lot of time, many days. Does it have an effect on relationships?
I'm not an astronaut, but I hear that it is either that your relationship is stronger and you're closer together for the joint effort, the dream that you and your spouse have together, or just like on Earth, when there's stress, it sometimes causes divorce. So I had the pleasure of meeting Nick Hague this year and doing presentations with Nick, and he had his wife who is in the Air Force and also works for NASA and the program, and they're an amazing couple of people who have a shared dream and a shared mission, and their positive effort together is amazing, and they're really great to meet. Nick was on the flight that you may have heard of that was a Soyuz rocket that went into space and then crash landed. And I can't imagine talking about having to get up and do it again. I can't imagine saying to yourself, oh, I'm going to get on another rocket after that crash and go again. And it was going to be many months later. But in support, he tells the story that the first thing his wife said after, like, are you okay, was, don't worry, you'll get there. And I think that's an amazing story, an amazing partnership. And he did get there, and I'm sure nobody could have been prouder than his wife. So I think it can bring you closer if you're teaming up with somebody. And I think that shared mission is great. And Nick, again, is an amazing story of it didn't go well, and he could have lost his life, but he was still focused. And even after that, he still made it to the space station.
Wow. That's where the dream of something greater than yourself is more important than just the ordinary every day, live in a house with 1.5 children and a couple of dogs, that kind of thing.
That and just the work that he felt strongly about in space and doing the research and working as a team. And I think he's a great example of that kind of astronaut who's focused on mission, has the support of a team with him, including his family, and then gets up there and does everything every day to make the best of the times that he's working on it.
What would be Christine's wish list? What would be on your wish list right now for what you would like to see happen in the next 5 years?
In space?
Yeah. With the work you're doing?
I would love to see us have some of the research that we're working on with partners really become a product that you as a citizen of Earth could leverage. An example is a company that's working on a prosthetic chip that goes into your eye that repairs macular degeneration, and I believe that they could make it into a product within 5 years that would change people's ability to see and the sight loss that affects them. And that kind of work, I think, is going to be really important to make those research things become product for us as citizens. And I'd like to see the space community drives that environmental protection, looking down at our planet and seeing how we can, from space, make sure that we're minimizing pollution, learning from those kinds of loop technologies where you make and remake things and don't just throw them away. I think those are going to be two things that I would like to see really make a change to us here on Earth.
Wow. And with people like you at the helm, I think it's going to be a cinch. That's what we're going to do.
I am but a cog in the wheel of a bigger system. So I'm just one of an awful lot of people that are there to make this work, and lots of people who really are trying to help people to get their research and to find new things. I think there's a lot of really great people working in it.
So you need a sense of a team. You need people to think not in terms of cowboys on their own doing whatever it is they think is correct, but they need an ability to work within a team. Is that correct?
My team alone at the International Space Station National Lab is definitely multi-faceted team that helps together to move somebody's idea to fruition. So you might talk to me first, but I'm not going to be the only one you're working with. So you'll have people on our science team who help you develop the science, people in our payload operations group who help you to put together the package and make it work in space, implementation partners who actually build the packaging so that it can go to space, and then when you get there, astronauts who are going to help you to get that research done. So I'm this important in this big span of things that it takes to get research done.
Yes, but without you, the wheel doesn't move. Also, we need every cog, every person.
I like to think that my team is kind of the front door, and we welcome you to come on in our front door, and then we'll introduce you to some other nice people who can help you out.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, you see me knocking at your door one day with some experiments I'd like to conduct with psychology in space, maybe.
That would be interesting, wouldn't it? See what goes on.
How far are we from running an entire seminar in space?
Wouldn't that be neat?
Wouldn't that be something?
Your next podcast from space.
Well, there you go. And you know what? I'm going to make that happen. Maybe we'll talk off air in a short while, and we'll discuss the possibilities there. Here's one more question before I take any more questions. If you have any questions for Christine right now, she represents the International Space Station, and she's the front door that everybody walks through for cooperation and working with them on the National Lab.
Right.
National Lab. So that if you have experiments you want to conduct in space, if you're a company and you represent a company and you want to do some of these, Christine would be one of the people that you would talk to. She's the front door, and then she'll give you the back door if it doesn't work. I'm not sure. I'm just kidding. but regardless, she'll help you with getting your ideas into space, into fruition. But before that, let me ask you a question. Someone like Mel Gill, who has an experiment he wants to conduct, the steps I need to take is to talk to you first, and then the cost of doing this would be dependent on what experiments I want to conduct. Is that correct?
Yeah, and the first thing is, so we're a U.S. national lab, and with all the respect to all of your many viewers from around the world, there's probably a different contact in different countries. So
Okay.
for the United States, or for people who have an entity in the United States, an example is Adidas is a German company, but they have a U.S. presence, and so I work with their U.S. presence. So and what happens is, for our organization, is you pitch your concept. Here's what we think we'd like to do, and explain why you need to use space, and explain what the results of that you're expecting. That's about 2 pages, right? It's a quick thing. What do you want to do? How do you want to do it? Why do you want to do it? And then we get through the initial okay, if we've got an okay on that. And then there's a proposal. And I'm sure this happens if you're working with the European Space Agency or JAXA in Japan. You write up a proposal and explain exactly what you want to do, how you want to do that. And you'll work with an implementation partner that knows how to package an experiment for space, because it just doesn't work the same in microgravity as it does in your lab on Earth. And so there are experts in that help you. For us at the International Space Station, the rocket trip up and back and the use of the astronauts is covered by taxpayer dollars. So you, as a scientist, don't have to cover the enormous cost of what that would be. That's millions of dollars worth of value, and that's not something that you would get a bill for. What you will pay for is your own time and your own materials, which you would be doing anyway. And then there's a cost to cover that packaging. And that can be as low as a few $1,000s, and it can be as high as $500,000, depending on what it is that you want to do and how it has to be packaged.
You know, that's relatively inexpensive compared to everything else on Earth.
If you were working at a company and you already have a lab and you already have the materials and you already have people working on it, so that's a sunk cost, and then you just have to pay for the difference to do the experiment in space. But I will say this: the most successful researchers are ones that have a plan for doing multiple phases of a project, because it goes back to what I'm saying about learning when something doesn't work. It doesn't always provide you the eureka, I found the answer, I've cured cancer in the first round. It's multiple years and multiple phases. So we encourage people that are working on it to think long term and think to what they want to get to and what phases we can take to get them there.
Like a partnership.
That's what we're here for.
To develop partnerships. That's awesome. Now, one more question. The countries that are working together with you, I'm sure there are a lot of countries that would like to. How do you stop people from trying to think of this in terms of a military operation as opposed to a commercial operation? Do you separate that, or?
Military doesn't go through the International Space Station National Lab.
Not at all. Yeah.
No, they go through NASA. So NASA handles anything that's military. I don't know how other countries do that, but I do know that the agencies that are working on the space station, like I said, with the European Space Station,
and then they would do that.
The Japanese team, they're all looking for those commercial opportunities to add value from this investment that they have made.
So do you see one day companies supporting flights into space? Like you see astronauts with Adidas planted here and Nike over here and on the helmets, and
like NASCAR.
NASCAR, just like that, yeah.
That's the way to go. They'll all have their spacesuits that say different companies on there, and they'll be.
Are you serious? Really?
You know, I'm sure that marketing people everywhere would like the opportunity to get their brand in space, and who can blame them? But I also think that those companies are going to have the ability to put their scientists in space to do their research. So it could say Merck on your jacket because you work for Merck and they've sent you up there to do your research, and that's not very far off. So I think that there's lots of commercial opportunities for companies to go make something out of space.
And if somebody had a suggestion that would be helpful, useful, something they're thinking about, would they be able to contact you if I?
They sure can. I don't mind email at all. So they can send me an email and I'll be happy to hear it.
And I'll post that later after the show as well. Sure. So far, there's no real questions from people except from Joyce D'Souza, who says there is a radio station in ISS. Please tell us about it.
Well, there's a regular transmission to the space station, so people do talk to their families and can radio back and forth. Most people who are on the station bring their own music because they don't. You know. And I have no idea what kind of things they play on that radio station, but they can radio music up. But again, most astronauts I know just they carry all their stuff on their own device, so they can listen to what they like to listen to.
Fantastic. Christine, I really appreciate you spending the time talking to us. We're coming now almost to the end of our interview. Is there a couple of things that you would like to share with the folks listening in now and the folks listening in later when they tune into this broadcast about?
I would say I think that the International Space Station in its 20 years has shown that we as a planet can cooperate on a goal. And we can do it without fighting, and we can make great progress together. And I'm hoping that sets the example for all of us to be able to get along and team up and make more progress.
And so maybe we might be more successful off planet than we are on planet.
Maybe it's because off planet your life depends upon it. So, you know.
Right. We'll be busy fighting Klingons instead of each other, I guess.
There you go.
Yeah, who knows? What is your, and here I go zany before we say goodbye.
Okay.
Is there life other than us out there in space? Is there? What do you think personally?
Oh, I think there's life out there, but it may not look like the bar in Star Wars where everybody looks like weird and, you know, different kinds of people. It could be that it's single-celled life. It could be tiny little things, but I'm pretty sure that it's a big world and there's life out there somewhere.
There's no bar. Now that makes me horrible.
I'm sure that there are companies working on that. So I know for sure that there are companies working to stock your bar on Mars. So you'll
How
be
about that?
Yeah.
So it'll be a different kind of Martian. We'll use the potatoes to make vodka instead.
There you go.
There you go. I want to thank you for spending the time and helping us to understand what it takes to become a person that works in outer space, or at least within the reach of other planets. And I think from there we will be able to have some idea of the possibility thinking that goes into all of this. If you could address with one phrase, one paragraph right now, the people who are depressed because of this COVID thing happening throughout the planet, they see no other way out, and they feel locked in somehow with the lockdown and everything else. What would you say to those folks who are not feeling good about themselves and would like to become like you, cheery, happy, forward-looking? Give some advice, personal, from the heart.
I would say it's hard to find it sometimes when you feel that way, because you're trapped in your little space capsule in your house and not able to get out. But outside of that, there are so many positive things, like waters that are running cleaner and air that is cleaner, that is a good sign for us as humanity, that try to find those positive things just every day, even if it's pictures of puppies and kitties, just to get your mind off of the thing that is just really too hard to face. There are some good things going on. We need to look at those things.
Awesome. Very good advice. Christine, I want to thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. It's been great. Thanks so much.
Fantastic. And I would like to do this. There'll be about 15, 16 other interviews, but on the cycle around, I would love the last program to be you again.
That would be great. I would love to do that. So thanks for having me here today. And thanks to everybody who's tuned in. It's been great answering questions and talking.
Thank you so much, Christine. And good luck in space. And wave to me when you can.
I'll save you a seat.
Please. I'll reduce my size maybe by 40 kilos, and I'll get there at some point as well. Christine, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye-bye. and that was Christine, and we were in discussion about the space station, about the how being there changes a lot of how we see the world as well. Today, we wanted to discuss possibilities, and if you wanted to know why we changed our tack to be able to go forward, instead of talking about all the things that I've talked about, doing this job properly and the other thing properly and this and that. I wanted to come into the mindset that is necessary to create the kind of thinking to be able to take you from where you are to where you want to be. And if where you want to be seems an awful distance away, well, think about this young lady, Christine, who had a dream about going into space, and less than 2 years ago, just went and submitted her resume and everything else and says, hey, I want to go into space. This is what I want to do. And just did it. So without looking at the obstacles in the way, without complaining about everything that's in what you don't have and so on and so forth, she took what she had and say, hey, this is how I can contribute. This is what I can do. This is how I think I can become an important part of what it is you're doing. And yet at the same time, fulfill the dream that she had as a little girl, watching Star Trek and saying, this is where I want to be, which is also my dream, by the way. And so therefore, there's that connection and the common ground between Christine and me. So this brings us to a close for Uncommon Sense. And the one thing, Lawrence, you brought us something very important that she said. When astronauts return to Earth after a year or a long time in space, what do they appreciate? They appreciate smelling the air on Earth. What an amazing way. So instead of looking, you know, when I imagine astronauts looking out the window of their craft or the space station, and I wonder who cleans it, actually, so that they have a clean view all the time. We have to clean the car window. We have to do all of that. So what do we do? And I remember a long time ago when I was in Seattle, and it was 1981, 82, and I was looking after Mansell and his wife. And Mansell had Alzheimer's, and his wife started to have Alzheimer's as well at the same time. And I remember visiting them and her in the hospital. And it's something that brought this up as well. You see, before fixing what you're looking at, you have to check what you're looking through. I remember that day was a beautiful sun-filled day, and I had driven maybe about 300 miles to see her, Mansell's wife, Dora. She was 94 and had been in one room for close to 8 months. And I was her first visitor after a week or so. And she was so happy to see me. Even though it was so difficult for her to remember other people, she remembered me. She didn't remember my name, but she knew me, and you could see it in her eyes. But after catching up and talking, we sat in silence on the edge of her bed. I remember that. And finally, she complained about the day and how gray it was. And I realized then that her one window, hadn't been cleaned in that hospital in almost a year, maybe, because I've seen her in and out of that for at least 9 or 8 months. So when I said this to her, she chuckled, and as somebody who is 94-year-old can chuckle, and she uttered with her strange Russian accent, if you got a dirty eye, you see a dirty world. So it's the same with our minds and our hearts. For our very self, really, is the one window we have into this life. And so often we suffer the mood of a dirty window, believing that the brilliant world outside, which is gorgeous, beautiful, smells great, is gray. So perhaps the purpose of an authentic relationship is to help each other keep our minds and our hearts clear. Perhaps inner work is the ordinary art of window washing, so that the day is fully the day and our feelings are fully our feelings. And that way we begin to realize that with each other's help, we can keep cleaning the way in which we see the world, the way in which we perceive the reality around us. It's not as gray as we think it is. Sometimes our windows just need to be cleaned. The way in which we see the world needs to be cleaned. Maybe that's what the meaning of life is all about. Maybe that's what the space station, the International Space Station, gives us a glimpse into. Seeing our Earth from way up there. So I wanted to kick off this series of programs on possibility thinking by beginning with somebody who works in the International Space Station. And then from there we'll come down to Earth and we'll talk about everybody on this Earth and how they made it possible to get past what was before only a dream, what was before an obstacle, what was before blocks, what was before dirty windows that they couldn't see out of. It's time we clean those windows. Thank you for listening. This program is called Uncommon Sense. We're calling it Possibility Thinking. And you're listening to the voice of Dr. Mel Gill. Thank you for being part of this program and for your time. Good night.